Dominic Raab returns to Brussels to meet his counterpart Michel Barnier. Talks resumed last week with both sides still struggling to make progress on issues such as migrants' rights and the Irish border. So, can they make any progress today? It is, of course, the big question. I'm joined now by Ali Renison. She's Head of Europe and Trade Policy at the Institute of Directors. Monique Hawkins, campaigner for the 3 million EU citizens living in the UK. And Lucinda Creighton, she's former Irish Minister for European Affairs and also CEO of Vulcan Consulting. A very warm welcome to you, triumvirate of ladies there. Ali, if I can start with you first of all, and we heard Liam Fox today talking about turning the UK into an exporting superpower. Do you think that's a realistic ambition or empty rhetoric?
Well, I certainly think it's something to be welcomed. We, as business organisations, fed into the consultation that had this export strategy as its end result. And I think it's pragmatic in the sense that it's looking to try and increase exports as a share of the UK's GDP. It is an open-ended objective. But I think it's also hard to talk about that without also talking about what the potential impact, particularly in a no-deal scenario, is on our exports to the EU and vice versa. So we want to make sure that this is being dealt with in a sort of comprehensive, holistic way.
So you might have expected a bit more detail, might you?
No, I think there was detail in there on some of the areas that government is looking to improve upon with respect to its trade promotion services. But obviously there is a potentially missing piece around how the trade promotion services are linked up to the UK's future trade policy. Now, some of that still has yet to be determined because it will be impacted and shaped by our negotiations with the EU. So I think it sort of brings it back full circle to the need to really sort of move quickly ahead with the negotiations with the EU.
Okay, well, Monique, let's go on to you. I mean, you are campaigning for the rights of EU citizens who live in the UK, and there have been a number of assurances about their status and their rights as we go into Brexit. So I'm just wondering, how confident are you in any of those assurances? And in particular, how confident are you if we're looking at a no-deal Brexit?
Not very confident at all. I mean, we're not being given any information. We had a leak yesterday in the Telegraph saying in a no deal we'd be given all our rights unilaterally. Today there's another comment in the Times saying that, yes, but we won't get all our rights. I mean, this is really shocking. I mean, in June 2016, there was a statement by Gove, Boris, Priti Patel and Gisela Stewart saying there'll be no change for EU citizens already lawfully resident in the UK. And, you know, it is inconceivable, that it's incomprehensible that there seems to be such an anti-immigrant feeling is now, you know, dictating what politicians are saying about us. We are a small, finite group. And in any case, the unilateral guarantee of our rights is fairly meaningless. It's not enough, because what we need all those cross-border cooperation things that have been discussed in the withdrawal agreement. We need that ring-fenced, because someone who lives here, who's dependent on pensions aggregation from the rest of Europe, reciprocal healthcare cover, recognition of qualifications, there are so many things that matter to people's lives. Whereas the public seems to think that just us being allowed to live here is sufficient. I mean, unless all the stuff that's been agreed with the EU is ring-fenced, all of it is meaningless. And we're not protecting British in Europe either. The government has not fought for them to retain their freedom of movement. You know, if they wanted to keep the moral high ground, they should now be saying to the EU, even if we cannot solve the Irish backstop or anything else, let us at least ring-fence what we have agreed for citizens.
Okay.
Whereas instead we were bargaining chips, we've now become collateral damage.
Let me bring you in here, Lucinda, because many people are saying that we can talk about all these things until we're blue in the face, but we need, and there hasn't been yet, a proper solution for the Irish border question. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would, and I think it's borne out by the fact that both the UK government and the Irish government are now really gearing up their preparations for no deal. I think there's a lot of pessimism around, because you have basically mutually exclusive hardline positions. You obviously have the determination by the Irish government and the EU by extension to maintain a seamless borderless existence between Northern Ireland and the Republic, which of course would mean essentially at least the territory of Northern Ireland, if not the rest of the UK, remaining in the single market and effectively operating within the customs union. And obviously the commitment of those who campaign for Brexit and those who are still advocating for a very clean break, if you like, from the EU, who will not countenance the UK as a whole staying within the single market or effectively within the customs union. And then, of course, in the middle of it all, you have the position of the Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland, who will not allow the territory of Northern Ireland to be in any way treated differently or separately to the rest of the UK. So it's really a question of trying to square a circle. We've been going around this territory for the past 12 months, and there really still is no solution.
The IMF has warned, hasn't it, of pretty grave consequences for Ireland of the no-deal Brexit. 50,000 jobs lost and a 4% hit to GDP.
Absolutely, and certainly, business in Ireland is gearing up and trying as best it can to prepare for that worst case scenario. But it's very difficult because you are talking about an economy sustained largely by small and medium-sized enterprises, and the impact on those, their capacity to absorb that type of economic shock is minimal. And there's so much support that the government or indeed the EU can provide, but really it can't negate that. And I think there have been countless reports and studies at this point leaked on the UK side about the economic impact that will be felt across the UK. So it's basically lose-lose for both Ireland and the UK if these issues cannot be resolved. But the position of the Irish government is very clear. They cannot be resolved at a cost to peace on the island of Ireland, to the Good Friday Agreement, which underpins that peace, and the sort of existence and integrated economy and society that has existed really since 1998. So it's a really, really difficult conundrum. And I think, as I said at the outset, I think pessimism is taking hold because there seems to be very little latitude or willingness to compromise and find some sort of a meeting of minds. And I'm not confident that will happen today or in the weeks ahead in Brussels in the negotiations.
Okay, Ali Renison, let's come back to you. I mean, if we are looking at a no-deal Brexit, what will trade look like, do you think, particularly between the UK and the EU? One German official has said that it will become inferior to that of the EU-Russia trade relationship. What are your thoughts?
I think the biggest question around all of that is the uncertainty about how quickly things would happen. When we talk about no deal, what do we mean? Do we mean no deal with no agreement at all to try and keep the borders open to a certain extent? Do we mean no deal with any kind of transition and adjustment period for business and for governments on both sides to put in place the necessary changes to infrastructure that would require? So I think the biggest question around no deal is what does it actually look like? I think it's difficult to make any sort of hard and fast predictions now about exactly how bad it would be. But that's certainly the question that businesses are asking. Now, certainly they have been planning using on the basis for which a no-deal scenario, but trying to understand and quantify what no deal means is quite difficult for a lot of businesses. And what we're finding is that quite a lot of them haven't done any planning because it's so difficult to know what they are going to be making changes and adjustments to. So hopefully the technical notices, the no-deal notices that are coming out starting later this week will try and provide some of that information, because most businesses don't understand the sort of complexity where EU rules kind of continue to underpin the flow of trade and goods, particularly between the UK and the EU.
Confidence in Dr. Liam Fox, because he had originally said that this will be one of the easiest trade deals to negotiate in human history. Now he says, words from his very own mouth, that it's odds on that we'll crash out. How much confidence is there from business in his ability to negotiate?
I think that politicians should be mindful of the fact that businesses, in terms of how they are looking at trying to plan for Brexit, do follow those kind of statements very carefully. And so when a member of the government puts the chances of no deal at such a high percentage, that's very worrying, and people will take action and plans on the basis of that. Now, in all other sort of circumstances, we find the government really is stressing the likelihood and importance of reaching a deal. But the whole point of the no deal notices is to make sure people are prepared.
Monique, let's bring you back in here. I mean, what would be your advice for people who are very confused by the situation about their status and indeed their rights when they remain in the UK, even those who've got current settled status?
Well, there's no such thing as current settled status. You mean permanent residence? But yeah, I mean, we've just been told those rights will fall away. I mean, I don't know what I could say to reassure anyone. We've been wanting to speak to, for 2 years now, we've been wanting to speak to people in the UK government. We've met with Michel Barnier and his deputy several times. We have, to date, neither us nor the British in Europe have been able to speak to Theresa May, nor David Davis, nor Dominic Raab, despite repeated requests. Dominic Raab is, in fact, my constituency MP, so I wrote to him recently asking if I could speak to him. The reply was that there might be a conflict between his role as constituency MP and, Secretary of State for exiting the EU. I've said I'm quite happy to meet him on either terms, but, we need them to listen to us. We've been calling for ring fencing for 2 years now. The British in Europe are just going to be left in a completely messy combination between the sort of EU third country national status and individual countries' local immigration laws. I mean, I cannot understand why the UK government is not fighting for its citizens.
So you want their issues to be put back more firmly on the agenda. And Lucinda Creighton, just final word from you, the million-dollar question really, I suppose, is how does one go about squaring this circle with the Irish border? What is possibly a way of breaking this deadlock and moving forward?
Clearly, the only way that the border question can be resolved is for Northern Ireland to remain aligned with the rest of the island of Ireland from a regulatory point of view and from a customs control point of view. Now, whether that could be politically acceptable to the DUP is, well, to put it mildly, is questionable. So then the extension of that is, can there be some compromise around the rest of the UK remaining regulatorily aligned? That is, the Chequers proposals go some way to achieving that, but whether that can be passed through or acceptable to the Conservative Party, to the government as a whole, to Westminster ultimately, for all sorts of reasons, not just from a Eurosceptic point of view, but also from the point of view of those who oppose Brexit. There are so many hurdles, I think, and obstacles to be traversed between now and the end of the year. It's going to be a very big challenge. It's certainly going to test the political acumen and ability of Theresa May, and she has a very, very difficult task ahead, I think.
Yes, indeed. I think everybody would acknowledge that. Well, there are a wide range of issues we got through there. Thank you very much for your time, Ali Renison, Monique Hawkins and Lucinda Creighton. Thank you.
Some breaking news to bring you. We're just hearing from the